You know, it's a curious thing the way one begins to vanish when one starts to awaken. Not in the dramatic sense of fading into thin air, not in some supernatural way, but in the quiet, almost invisible withdrawal from the world of noise. You begin to sense that something profound is happening, though nothing on the surface has really changed. You still wake up in the same bed, walk through the same streets, meet the same people, and yet something inside you no longer plays along. It's as if you were at a grand masquerade ball, and suddenly, for no reason at all, you decided to take off your mask. You look around, and everyone else is still dancing, still smiling behind their disguises, still utterly convinced that the masks are their faces. And when they glance at you barefaced, unadorned, they hesitate because something about you unsettles them. You are no longer in costume, and in a world of actors that makes you invisible. Now, most people think awakening means being seen more clearly, that enlightenment is a kind of spiritual spotlight shining down upon you. But the truth is precisely the opposite. The moment you awaken, you slip quietly out of the story everyone else is still telling. You're no longer a character bound by the script. The others, still caught in the play, can no longer recognize you because you're not responding to the same cues. It's not that you've gone anywhere. You're right there, breathing, walking, living, perhaps even smiling, but you've ceased to exist in the only way the world knows how to recognize you, as an identity, as a role, as a function. You're no longer the student, the worker, the parent, the believer, the doubter. You're just this, a presence, a noticing, and that's very disconcerting to those who depend on labels to navigate reality. You begin to notice how others are constantly reaffirming their masks to one another, exchanging tokens of agreement, complementing each other's costumes, maintaining the delicate illusion that the play is real. You can't join in the same way anymore. You still move among them, but you do so lightly, almost transparently. Their ambitions, their quarrels, their gossip, it all feels like echoes from a dream you've just awakened from. You can still hear the words, but they no longer reach your heart. And so you become invisible, not because the world rejects you, but because it cannot see what does not seek attention. The awakened mind no longer waves for recognition, no longer cries out, "Look at me." It simply is. And in that stillness, you discover a peculiar peace, a freedom that isn't granted by anyone else, but revealed by the absence of needing to be seen at all. But beware, this disappearance feels strange at first. There's a moment of loss, a pang of absence, as though something dear has been taken away. Yet what's actually gone is only the shadow, the image, the reflection you once mistook for yourself. The one who needed to perform, to explain, to justify, he's quietly stepped off stage. And now there is just this vast, unbounded silence, and you standing in the middle of it, realizing that you've been here all along. The strange disappearance, then, is not a tragedy. It is the beginning of freedom. For what vanishes is only the false, and what remains is what cannot vanish, the simple awareness of being, the quiet center of it all. And though the world may not see you, you are more real than you have ever been. You see, from the very beginning, we were all taught how to play. Nobody told us it was a game. Of course, that would have spoiled the fun, but make no mistake, every society trains its children for performance. From the moment we learn to speak, we are told who we are supposed to be: a good boy, a smart girl, a responsible citizen, a respectable adult. Each word, each title, a little badge of identity pinned to the surface of our being. And so we learn the rules. We learn how to move the right way, to say the proper things, to believe the proper beliefs. We learn which dreams are acceptable and which must be hidden away. We become very skilled players, experts in pretending. And after a while, the pretending becomes so convincing that we even fool ourselves. We begin to mistake the costume for the body, the mask for the face. We say things like, I must be successful. I must make my parents proud. I must find my purpose. But these are not natural impulses. They are scripts handed to us long before we ever knew we had a choice. And so we act them out, often beautifully, sometimes painfully, but always within the boundaries of the play. Now, the curious thing about the awakened person is that they begin to see the scenery wobble. They start to notice that the walls of this theater are made of paper. The applause they once craved starts to sound hollow. They realize that all these elaborate gestures, the competitions, the ambitions, the masks of moral superiority, are simply parts of the production. And at first, this realization can be quite funny. You laugh because it's all so obvious once you see it. You laugh at yourself, at how seriously you took your role. You laugh at the solemnity of the actors who scold each other for breaking character. It's delightful for a moment, but then the laughter fades and a kind of sadness arises because you begin to see how much of life's suffering is born out of this pretending. You watch people exhausting themselves to be admired, terrified of being overlooked, desperate to keep their costumes from tearing. You see how much energy is spent maintaining the illusion that we know who we are. You see lovers who cannot love freely because they're afraid of losing the image they project to one another. You see workers chasing titles they don't even want. Students memorizing truths they don't believe. And whole nations performing grand moral dramas for the sake of an audience that never existed. The game, you realize, is not evil. It's not even wrong. It's simply what we do when we forget that we're playing. The tragedy is not in the game itself, but in the seriousness with which we play it. And so, when awakening dawns, you don't stop the game, you simply stop mistaking it for reality. You can still play, of course, attend the meetings, pay the bills, exchange pleasantries, but somewhere inside, there's a quiet smile, a twinkle in the eye that says, ah, yes, here we go again. You no longer confuse your role with your essence. You no longer imagine that your identity needs defending. And this is why awakened people seem strange to the rest of the cast. They still appear on stage, but they're no longer acting. Their lines flow naturally. Their movements are spontaneous. They're improvising in a play everyone else believes is scripted. And that's what makes them invisible, not because they hide, but because they no longer fit the pattern. You see, society thrives on recognition. It needs you to be predictable, measurable, defined. But when you slip out of your role, the system loses its grip. It can't categorize you anymore. You become, in a sense, unclassifiable, like a note that doesn't belong to any known scale. And that's the beauty of it. To awaken is not to quit the game, but to remember that it is, after all, a game. And when you play knowingly, you play with grace. You laugh, you stumble, you bow, and you exit when it's time, without complaint or pride. For you see, the point was never to win, but to dance, to play beautifully, even if only for a little while. Now, what happens when you begin to take off your mask is rather unsettling. You see, you've worn it for so long that it has fused to your skin. At first, you might not even realize it's a mask at all. You call it my personality, my beliefs, my story. You've polished it, defended it, decorated it, made it respectable, even lovable. But one day, quite unexpectedly, you begin to feel a faint looseness around the edges. Something doesn't quite fit anymore. It's as though you've been living inside a tight costume, and suddenly You can't quite breathe. You start to tug at it gently at first, and to your surprise, it gives way. You glimpse, for the first time, the nakedness beneath, the raw simplicity of being that needs no costume at all. And in that instant, something shifts. The mask begins to crack. You notice how much of what you say, what you do, even what you feel, has been performed. You see how your smiles are often rehearsed, your concerns borrowed, your opinions recycled. You see how every mask is built from the approval of others, from the fear of being left unseen. And the more clearly you see this, the more impossible it becomes to keep pretending. But here's the strange thing. Once you begin to take it off, you realize how attached everyone else is to your disguise. They need you to keep it on. Your mask reassures them that theirs is real. When you remove yours, it threatens the stability of the whole play. People look at you with suspicion, even discomfort. You've changed, they say, as if honesty were a betrayal. And in a way, it is a betrayal of the false pact we made with one another to keep the dream alive. You begin to see through not only your own mask, but the masks of others. The businessman's confidence, the priest's certainty, the lover's devotion, all part of a magnificent charade we forgot we were performing. And yet, seeing through it doesn't fill you with contempt. It fills you with compassion, because now you understand that behind every mask, there is fear, the fear of being nothing. For the mask was always a shield against emptiness. It was the painted smile that said, I matter, I belong, I am someone. To remove it feels like death. And in a sense, it is the death of the imagined self. But oh, what a beautiful death it is. Because when the mask falls, what's revealed is not a void, but an openness, a presence so quiet, so ordinary, that it escapes attention. You are still here, but you are no longer what you thought you were. The world's labels slide off like rain on glass. You cannot be captured in a description. You become transparent, not as a ghost, but as clear water that reflects everything and holds on to nothing. And this transparency is what makes you invisible. When people look at you, they can no longer find the familiar identity to project upon. You don't mirror their expectations anymore, so they simply look past you as though you aren't there. But this invisibility is not a curse, it is grace. For in being unseen, you are finally free to see. You begin to notice life as it really is, not filtered through the lens of who you think you should be, but as an unfiltered, living mystery. The colors grow brighter, the silence deeper. Every breath feels like the first breath ever taken in the history of the universe. You walk through the same streets, yet you are walking through eternity. The irony is that, though you seem to disappear from the world's stage, you actually return to life more fully than ever. The actor is gone, but the play continues spontaneous, effortless, alive, and for the first time, you realize that it was never the mask that gave you meaning. It was the space beneath it, the pure awareness, quietly watching through the eye holes all along. You see, most of our suffering comes from the need to be seen. From childhood, we're taught that existence requires witnesses, that unless someone notices us, we might vanish altogether. So we learn to perform. We smile on command. We shape our words like currency. We decorate our lives with achievements, so others will nod and say, ah, yes, this one matters. But the need to be recognized is an invisible leash. Every compliment becomes a tug, every criticism a sting, and soon our sense of self is hanging by a thread woven from other people's opinions. We are no longer living, we are advertising. When the awakening begins, you feel the pull of this leash loosen. Suddenly, the applause doesn't echo the same way. The opinions of others, those constant waves that once carried you, begin to lose their force. You see that every judgment, whether praise or blame, is only a reflection in someone else's mirror. And you remember that mirrors do not possess light of their own. At first, this realization frightens you. You think, if I am no longer defined by their gaze, who am I? The ego whispers that to disappear from attention is to die. But watch closely. When you step out of the spotlight, you don't vanish, you expand. The room grows larger, quieter. You discover there is an entire universe outside the circle of light, and you are part of it. Visibility is heavy because it demands maintenance. You must polish the image, defend the reputation, rehearse the story. But invisibility is light. There is nothing to protect, nothing to prove. You still move through the world, but now your steps make no noise of self-importance. You meet people, you speak, you work, but the center of gravity has shifted from being noticed to noticing. And in that shift, love itself changes shape. You no longer crave admiration, you begin to sense intimacy in silence, in shared being rather than shared opinion. To be unseen is not loneliness, it is spaciousness. It is the freedom of a cloud drifting through the sky, not needing to announce its beauty. So the awakened one becomes invisible, not by hiding, but by ceasing to demand recognition. The eyes of the world slide past, unable to fix on a shape that refuses to solidify. Yet within that transparency there is a brightness that doesn't fade, because it isn't borrowed, it shines of its own accord. The paradox, you see, is that when you no longer need to be seen, everything becomes luminous. The trees, the faces, the smallest motions of life glow with their own presence. You have dropped the heavy armor of visibility and stepped lightly into reality itself. And so, quite naturally, when the world no longer binds you through its mirrors, you begin to drift from the noise. Not out of bitterness, not in protest, simply because the noise no longer holds your attention. It's as though you've been listening to a song your entire life, and suddenly you realize the record has been skipping on the same note for years. You step away, not because you hate the music, but because you've finally heard the silence underneath it. This withdrawal is not a decision, it's a movement, like the tide receding from the shore. You find yourself less interested in the conversations that once consumed you. The endless debates about who's right, who's wrong, who's winning, who's losing, they begin to sound strangely hollow, like children arguing over the rules of a game they've invented on the spot. You listen for a while, you smile, and then you wander outside into the open air. People may say you've become detached, that you're withdrawing from life. But the truth is, you're finally entering it. You start to notice things you hadn't seen in years, the texture of the wind, the scent of the rain, the quiet pulse of being that beats beneath all activity. You find immense satisfaction in simple acts, watching clouds drift, washing dishes, listening to the hum of the world without trying to change it. And yet, this quiet withdrawal can unsettle those who are still deeply invested in the game. They may accuse you of indifference or laziness, for they mistake stillness for stagnation. But you know now that stillness is not the absence of motion, it's the presence of awareness. When you act, it is no longer to prove or acquire, but because the movement itself feels right. You still speak, but your words are fewer. You still care, but your care is lighter, like sunlight touching the surface of a leaf. You no longer rush to save or fix others, for you see that each person is already walking their own perfect path, even through confusion. And in this quiet withdrawal, something beautiful begins to happen. Life reintroduces itself. The world you once thought you knew, crowded, demanding, loud, becomes intimate and tender. You find company in solitude and conversation in silence. Even the moments that used to feel empty now shimmer with presence. To those still chasing noise, you seem invisible. To you, they seem asleep. But there is no judgment in that, only understanding. You remember that you too once needed the noise to drown out the silence. You too once feared what you now cherish. So you don't reject society. You simply stop feeding it with your restlessness. You become a space in which life can breathe freely. The endless striving falls away. And what remains is a kind of gentle humility, not the pride of achievement, but the grace of belonging. And that, my friends, is the beginning of true participation in the dance of life. For it's only when you stop trying to lead that you realize the music has been carrying you all along. The ego's greatest fear is not death, it is irrelevance. You see, death at least promises drama. It gives the self a kind of tragic importance. But irrelevance, being forgotten, being unseen, that is far worse, because it means the story was never as solid as you thought. When the awakening deepens, this fear comes knocking. It whispers, if I stop chasing, if I stop standing out, I'll vanish. And in a way, yes, you will. But what vanishes is only the shadow that was never truly you. Still, the moment before that disappearance can feel like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the vast unknown. The mind rebels against it. It insists on anchoring itself to some definition. I am this, I am that, I am important because. But every because becomes thinner the more you look. You reach for meaning, and your hands close around air. You realize that everything you clung to name, past, purpose, pride, was only a temporary costume for something far larger and more mysterious than the word you can hold. And it's terrifying, because the self doesn't want to dissolve into the ocean. It wants to remain a distinct wave, forever proud, separate, admired. It wants to say, look, I'm over here, but the tide has other plans. It draws you back, gently but irresistibly, into itself. When this begins to happen, some people fight. They build new identities out of spirituality, the awakened one, the enlightened one, the teacher, the seeker. They trade the old mask for a subtler, shinier one. But awakening will not let you keep even that. The tide keeps coming. It strips away everything you try to rebuild, until finally you surrender not in defeat, but in relief. And then something unexpected occurs. You realize that disappearing isn't the end of you. It's the end of the story about you. What remains is not nothingness, but vastness. It's as if you were a wave terrified of the ocean, only to discover that you were the ocean all along. From this perspective, irrelevance is impossible. Because what would the ocean be irrelevant to? The ocean does not need applause. It doesn't need to be noticed. It is utterly, magnificently, without justification. And so, the fear of disappearing dissolves in the light of that realization. You see that you were never here to be somebody. You were here to be everything, to play your part fully, and then vanish gracefully into the total symphony of existence. The ego fears being forgotten, but what it calls forgetting, life calls freedom. For when there is no one left to defend, no image left to polish, you are free to move as the wind moves invisible, yet everywhere. To be unseen is to be unburdened. The moment you stop needing to be watched, something extraordinary happens. The weight of existence lifts. You move, you speak, you breathe, and none of it needs to be justified anymore. You realize how exhausting it was to carry the image of yourself, to keep it upright and polished for display. The invisible person, you see, still lives in the same world as everyone else, still buys groceries, pays bills, smiles at strangers. But beneath it all, there's an ease, an absence of strain. You are no longer dragging around that heavy idea of who I am supposed to be. You act without effort because there is no actor left to perform. And this lightness is not laziness. It is not carelessness. It is the graceful precision of a leaf falling exactly where the wind allows. There is no resistance, no argument with life. Things happen, and you flow with them, not out of resignation, but out of recognition. You see that life has always been happening by itself, and that your struggle to control it was the only thing that ever made it heavy. It's amusing, isn't it? How seriously we once took our dramas. How we thought the universe was watching our every triumph and failure, as though keeping score. But the universe is not a judge. It is a dance. And once you see this, you realize you've been dancing all along, only you were pretending to march. This lightness also changes the way you relate to others. You no longer approach people as roles or as tools to confirm your importance. You begin to see them as the same life expressing itself in a different costume. And when that recognition takes hold, there's a natural kindness that emerges, not the forced politeness of morality, but the effortless compassion of one hand not wanting to harm another. You find that love itself becomes lighter. It no longer needs to possess or prove. It doesn't say, be mine. It simply says, be. The invisible person doesn't fall in love to complete themselves. They love because there is no separation left to cross. And what's remarkable is that this lightness doesn't make you distant. It makes you more intimate with life than ever. You begin to sense its texture in every moment, the brush of wind on your skin, the rhythm of footsteps, the sound of laughter in another room. You are no longer behind the glass of self-consciousness, looking out. You are the scene itself, vivid, alive, and weightless. When you stop trying to be seen, you start to see. You see that the world was never judging you, never measuring you. That was only your reflection in the mirror of fear. The world has always been shining, waiting for you to drop the heavy armor of self-importance and join its play. So being unseen, you become luminous. You move like light through clear water, touching everything, claiming nothing. And in this lightness, you finally understand that the freedom you sought was never the power to do whatever you want, but the peace of no longer needing to be anything at all. When the self becomes transparent, so does the world. What once appeared solid and separate begins to shimmer like sunlight on water, where every wave both reflects and dissolves in the next. You look around and realize that nothing stands alone. Every sound, every movement, every thought is part of a single vast gesture that has no edge and no center. This is what I mean by transparency. The world hasn't changed, you have. You've stopped treating reality as a collection of objects and started seeing it as a living relationship. The tree isn't over there, and you aren't over here. The seeing and the seen are one process, as inseparable as flame and light. In that recognition, all the old boundaries begin to melt. The mind that once divided the world into me and you, good and bad, success and failure, grows quiet. It sees that opposites are not enemies but complements, waves rising and falling on the same sea. The dance needs both sides, or it wouldn't be a dance at all. You notice how the world no longer feels like something happening to you but through you. There's no longer the sense of being a tiny creature pushed around by fate. The wind moves, and you move with it. The laughter of a child, the crash of thunder, the sound of your own breath, they are all one continuous song. And this realization brings an odd kind of humor. You start to laugh at the seriousness of your former efforts, the way you once tried to capture life in words, ideas, doctrines. For now you see that every attempt to grasp the world was like trying to scoop water with a net. The tighter you clutched, the more it slipped through your fingers. The transparent world doesn't need to be understood, it needs to be lived. You see, the intellect wants certainty, but life only offers flow. It offers mystery, music, and motion. The river never asks where it's going, and yet it always arrives. When you become transparent, you become like that river. You no longer resist your own current. You let it take you through joy, through sorrow, through change, and you begin to realize that every bend, every rapid, every still pool is the river knowing itself in another form. There is no conductor in this symphony, no master puppeteer pulling the strings. The universe dances itself, and you are that dance. When you strike a note, the cosmos hums along, because there was never any division between the musician and the music. And what peace there is in that recognition. No need to fix the world, no need to conquer it. You participate simply by being. You smile at the unfolding of it, all the comedies, the tragedies, the absurdities, because you see that even the chaos has rhythm. So, transparency is not detachment. It's intimacy beyond boundaries. It's seeing that the inside and the outside were never two. The breath you take in becomes the breath the trees release. The light that touches your eyes was born in the heart of a star. You have never been separate, only pretending, for the fun of it. And when you realize this, you stop trying to grasp life and begin to trust it. You float rather than fight. You listen rather than insist. You see that to be transparent is to allow existence to shine through you, to live without interference, without the fog of self. It is then that reality becomes astonishingly clear, and you wonder how you ever missed it. You look around, and the whole universe winks back, as if to say, "Ah, so you finally noticed. After the mountain, back to the village." That is always the way of things. The story of awakening is never complete until the one who disappeared returns, not as a prophet, not as a hero, but as someone who can laugh and sip tea again. You see, many imagine that awakening means escape, rising above the dust of daily life into some perpetual serenity, detached from the world's mess. But the truth is subtler and infinitely more human. When the seeing is clear, you no longer need to stay apart from anything. You can walk back into the marketplace, mingle among the noise and the neon lights, and it doesn't disturb your peace in the slightest. For the marketplace is the same as the mountain. The clamor of voices is another kind of wind. The flicker of traffic lights, another sort of sunrise. Once you've seen the play for what it is, you no longer need to leave the stage. You simply stop mistaking it for the entire universe. Now, you can move among the players, smiling at their seriousness without mocking it. You can take part in the game again, perhaps even more fully than before, because you know it is a game. You pay your bills, you help your friends, you fall in love, you lose, you weep, you begin again. But behind it all, there is a quiet laughter, a deep knowing that says, yes, of course. This too is the dance. And people may ask, how can you laugh in the midst of chaos? The answer is not callousness. It is compassion. When you've seen that all beings are dreamers in the same great sleep, you cannot hate them for dreaming. You can only wish them gentle dreams until they too begin to stir. You see, when you were striving for awakening, you imagined it would set you apart from the crowd. But when awakening comes, you realize there was never a crowd at all, only the one playing at being many. And so you rejoin the play, not as a savior, but as a participant who knows it's safe to play, because no one can truly be harmed in a dream that ends in waking. In Zen, they say, after enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. That means resume your humanity. Wash the dishes, answer the phone, tend the garden. The difference is, now you do it without resistance. There's no longer a doer behind the doing, no anxiety behind the action. The chopping of wood becomes the sound of the cosmos splitting itself in joy. The carrying of water becomes the river returning to the sea. You may seem ordinary, perhaps even invisible, but that's the secret. The awakened one hides perfectly by being no one special. The divine wears the mask of the everyday. You are the laughter behind a cashier's smile, the quiet in the middle of an argument, the breath pausing between two notes of music. And that is the true return, not retreating from life, but melting so completely into it that there's no distinction left between the sacred and the mundane. Every step, every breath, every small gesture is a reflection of that great cosmic rhythm that has never ceased since the beginning of time. So when you walk through the marketplace, buying apples or waiting in line, remember, this too is the mountain. The mountain has come down to meet itself in the form of faces, voices, and the hum of traffic. And if you listen closely, beneath the sound of the city, you'll hear it the same stillness you once found in solitude, quietly singing through all things. You are not the reflection, you are the light that makes it possible. You see, all your life you've been staring into mirrors, the opinions of others, the expectations of society, the shifting images in your own mind. You thought that was you, the reflection smiling back, the story that seemed so solid. But the mirror was never the source. It was only catching a glimpse of what was already shining. And when the mirror shatters, when all the reflections fade, what remains is the light itself. That is what you are. Not the person in the story, not the image in the eyes of others, but the clear, silent radiance in which everything appears. To recognize this is to finally understand the secret hidden at the heart of every spiritual teaching, that the one who seeks was never separate from what was sought. The ocean was looking for itself in a single drop. The moon was chasing its own reflection across the water, never realizing that it was already full and luminous in the sky. This is why awakening is both loss and discovery. You lose your story, your importance, your place in the grand play, and in exchange, you gain everything. For what you find is not a new self, but the absence of the old one. And in that absence, a vast freedom. It's the freedom of being the mirror, reflecting all things but holding on to none. You see, joy and sorrow, life and death, rise and fall, but you do not cling. They come, they go, and you remain, the quiet witness of it all. And yet, even the word witness begins to dissolve, because there's no one separate who is doing the witnessing. There is only awareness itself, bright and boundless, watching its own play unfold. And when you live from that place, life becomes astonishingly simple. You can smile without reason, forgive without effort, love without fear. You can meet every moment, even the painful ones, as an old friend returning from a long journey. The moon doesn't struggle to shine. It doesn't ask to be seen. It simply reflects the light that already is. In the same way, when you stop trying to define or defend yourself, you become a mirror for the infinite, silent, still, and utterly transparent. And here's the great paradox. When you disappear in this way, you do not lose yourself, you find everything. You are no longer trapped inside your own story. You are the space in which all stories arise. You are no longer the actor. You are the stage, the light, the audience, and the play itself. So, to vanish completely is not a tragedy, it is a homecoming. It is the recognition that you were never apart from anything, never exiled, never in need of saving. The entire universe has been unfolding within you, and you have been unfolding within it, from the beginning and forevermore. And that is the end of the illusion of separation. That is the final stillness. The mirror rests, the moon shines, and the world, the whole miraculous, chaotic, beautiful world, continues to dance in perfect harmony, exactly as it always has.